Hi friends, it's Caroline Maguire. I'm here to talk about all things ADHD and friendship. So many of you liked my Bridgerton reactions that I decided what other shows could I do? So I have an episode of Brooklyn 99 here. I'm going to do a couple of episodes, also Only Murders in the Building. These are some of my favorite episodes and I'm going to comment about them. And if you haven't watched my Bridgerton reactions, go back and watch them. This is Brooklyn 99, Season 1, Episode 4, Me Time, and I love this episode. It is where they're trying to read the captain, and if you've ever watched Brooklyn 99, the captain is sort of hard to read. You're always trying to figure out his facial expressions, and I feel like that's so apropos to those of us with ADHD trying to figure other people out. Some people are really hard to read, and I love this show and I love the captain. He's such a great character. So let's watch.
It's a great picture, sir.
I hate it.
Me too. So, I have an eyewitness in the person at your case. Only problem is the sketch artist is out sick. How do you want me to proceed?
Figure it out, Santiago. It's your case.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you.
Are you bowing?
No. This is how I walk.
What do you need, Quasimodo? I gotta go meet Boyle and Peralta.
Is there something wrong with the captain? It seems like he's in a bad mood.
I don't know. Who can tell?
Okay, what I love about this is that Amy is so eager to please the captain that she actually bows to him at the end of the scene, and he is telling her that he doesn't like this picture of him on the wall. She's trying to tell him that she needs something, and he basically says, figure it out to Amy Santiago. And Amy Santiago is someone who is very sycophantish. She loves the captain, and so she's super concerned with trying to read him, trying to identify. And Rosa says, who can read him? Who knows what mood he's in? And I feel like there are people like this where we just don't quite know what mood they're in. Now, I would say that there's some big signifiers here. He throws his picture in the trash. He seems to be sort of gruff with her in his tone. She's trying to figure him out, but he is not necessarily telling her how he feels. I would say she could do something I call boosting the signal. She could have asked him, I'm sensing something. I'm not really sure if I'm reading this right. Am I sensing that you are annoyed, Captain? Or what can I do if things aren't going the way we planned? She doesn't do that. She ends up bowing to him and backing away from him, which I think is just hysterical. The captain is often talked about in many scenes as someone who isn't showing a lot. He doesn't show what's called micro expressions, where you show a lot of little things with your facial expressions. A lot of neurodivergent people actually become very hyper vigilant watching for those micro expressions. So I don't necessarily think looking for them in some cases is a good thing, because it makes us really feel insecure. But it's really interesting that she's not able to read him, and it starts to affect her mood. I love this scene because I think it brings up a lot of our insecurities with reading facial expressions. It brings up how we sometimes aren't able to read them and like what's an alternative. All right, we're gonna watch some Only Murders in the Building. I love this show. I think it's one of the best shows out there, and there are some really great social things going on. So we are gonna watch Only Murders in the Building, Episode 1. And this is a pivotal moment in the episode.
Lester, is this real? I don't know. We're finding out.
Okay, in this scene, they have to flee their building because there's a fire alarm, and they all end up at the same restaurant, all the main characters, and they've all been listening to this podcast, but they don't know that yet. And so this is a scene where they all kind of find out that they have something in common.
My favorite podcast just dropped a new episode tonight.
What does Bo have in his mouth? I don't know.
What I love about this moment is this is special interest incarnate. They both come to this table. One of the characters says, I just need to listen to my podcast. I won't even bother you. and he looks at the table, and the Steve Martin character has laid out a map with all of the stuff about this true crime podcast documented on this map. And they have that moment that we all wish for, where they connect and they zing and they realize they both have the same interest. And then this is where we can, there's levels of friendship. I talk about this all the time. Friendship has to be built, trust has to be built, but there are ways in which we can jump ahead a little bit. And this is one of those ways, when we share special interests and we share experiences. They immediately have no platitudes, no small talk. They go right into, what's in the dog's mouth, because they've just been watching a podcast and that's where they left off. And they are jumping the levels of friendship. They are going to an immediate zing. What's interesting is they will actually later in the scene have to build trust, and later in this season 1. So the trust building doesn't not happen. If you know the story and the plot line, they will later have moments of distrust. And part of that goes back to the fact that they never built trust. They didn't build their friendship slowly over time. They're thrown in together by this love of the podcast. They have this shared experience. But I think it really speaks to how important shared experience and shared interest is. Rather than super awkward conversations, rather than them not knowing what the other person likes, they have this pivotal moment where they realize. And now the Selena Gomez character is going to come in. So let's watch that.
Hey, come over. Yeah. Sit down. Half the building's in here. I'm Oliver, by the way, Oliver Putnam.
Charles Hayden Savage.
Hey, I'm Mabel.
No, really, what is... Oh, great, old school name.
Get out. What the fuck is in Bo's mouth?
Becky's panties.
It is not Ray.
Too obvious.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm just relieved that something of Becky Butler showed up somewhere.
And again, rather than building up to it, she jumps right in and she asks what is going on in the podcast. And they immediately connect. Interest is a way to connect to other people. Now, I would argue that sometimes you don't get to have this amazing experience where you immediately know what someone is feeling. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes you have to build up to it. Sometimes you have to feel people out. But ultimately, when you drop what I call as a ping, when you say, I really can't live without skiing, or I really love true crime, and someone else feels that way too, you have this explosive moment where you both realize you like the same things, and you have this immediate, very real connection, as opposed to feeling vague about someone, not feeling you have that connection. Shared activities where everybody has the same interests, or where you're more likely to meet like-minded people. That's why I really harp on those, because that is likely to bring you with other people that when you're feeling them out will have the same experience. And you're gonna see they all just sit down, have a meal together, and start talking about this podcast.
Who are you, you fascinating creature? I mean, we got our places 30 years ago when the Arconia was affordable, but you... Would your parents have a place there or
Good
something?
God, you don't have to answer that, Mabel. I mean, unless you want to, because I'm also curious.
How do I know you?
Oh, Charles was in an old TV series many, many years ago. What was it called? Bozos.
Brazos.
Oh, okay.
So I love this moment because they start talking about the podcast, and then the Oliver Putnam character is very forward, and he is sometimes what we would call TMI. He says the wrong thing, he asks disconcerting questions, and he is just sort of he's sort of what my grandma would have called a nosy Parker, right? He's just sort of nosy. And he asks her how she can possibly afford an apartment in their building, which is like a very exclusive New York building. And the Charles Hayden Savage character, who is much more awkward, much more reserved, really struggles with people, says, oh my God, you don't have to answer that question because it's just not something that you're supposed to ask, right? It goes against sort of appropriate behavior, social norms. But then he says, oh, but I'm really curious too if you want to answer. And she doesn't answer. She doesn't give them an answer. And it really shows also how this moment where the character asks something that he could have waited to get to know is sort of a social wrong turn, and it actually creates a lot of awkwardness. So even if you jump into a relationship with someone, going back to those level of friendships, the stages of friendship, sometimes you still have to wait to build trust. And the Mabel character has a lot of trust issues, we come to find out. She doesn't share things easily. She's not going to tell them her background. It takes her 2 or 3 episodes to tell them why she's in the Arconia and why she's there. And so just because you have this zing, why I really love this episode in this moment is just because you have this zing doesn't necessarily mean you bypass the levels of trust and that you bypass that trust building. He asks something that you would ask when you have more of a relationship, when you've built trust with someone, when you've known them, and when you've moved through some of the stages of friendship. And she doesn't choose to answer because she isn't going to necessarily give him that information. She's not ready. So that's something good to remember too. As neurodivergent people, we love to jump the gauntlet. We don't want to move through the stages of friendship, and that's okay. But we have to have in the back of our mind that we still have to go through the stages of trust. Trust is earned, trust is built. We watch other people. Self-disclosure means we disclose and people disclose in line with that disclosure. And so what the Oliver Putnam character tends to do, and this is why I think he's so fun, is he tends to move right in and ask questions that he hasn't necessarily earned that trust. Thanks so much for sharing these clips with me. I love these shows and I love that they bring us some real lessons about friendship. And thanks to everyone who held on to the end. Bye, friends.